All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Functional Aging Summit. So glad you're with us and really excited to have Dr. Christian Thompson here with us to talk about screening and goal setting with older adults. Coming at you from California, which I assume the weather's probably pretty nice out there, but a little dry, I would say, right?
It is beautiful, as you can tell out the window. Yeah, very dry. We haven't really had much rain this winter or this past winter, so it's not looking good for fire season.
Yeah, we've been getting all the rain, which too
So I
much
hear.
rain for the crops, so farmers are
Right,
complaining. But
right,
well,
right.
really good to see you again. Dr.
Good to see
Thompson
you
is
too.
on our board and a regular contributor, specializes in balance. He teaches university classes, working with older adults. A lot of great experience that he's going to be bringing and sharing with you. And this is one of the topics that we tend to kind of overlook, right? We kind of breeze through this in many cases. I'll be honest with you. So I really appreciate that you're going to be addressing this topic in a little bit more detail. So with that, if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat section, but we'll try to hold those off until the end and then have some Q&A time at the end. So turning it over to you.
Thank you, Cody. Thanks so much. It's great to be here, everyone. Thank you all for being on board and for the last session of the summit to come to this presentation. And typically when I've presented at previous summits and done webinars for FAI and things like that, it's usually very programming based. So I'll present on fall risk reduction, I'll present on assessment and program design, but I kind of also recognize the importance of how to kick things off as effectively as possible with a new client or new people coming into programs you might be offering. And there's a lot of confusion and questions around this process of pre-participation screening. What should we do? What shouldn't we do? There have been some changes and recommendations recently that I want to go over with all of you. And then also, not only is it important to get a picture of what these clients of ours, what they're dealing with from a health and medical perspective, but we also really want to start establishing that rapport with them, get them connecting with us, get us connecting with them. So the goal setting process is also, I think, something that's really important for us to discuss. And I'm going to put out there just one possible process that you can put into place that sort of systematizes the goal setting process, the rapport building process. And we'll go through a few different tools to hopefully help you and give you a little time to practice with that as well. The reason why I put coming soon on this banner, I had recently, about 2 months ago, put out the Complete Guide to Balance Training, continuing ed course through FAI. Thank you for those of you who have seen it and perhaps who have gone through that course. We'll also be doing the Complete Guide to Training the Active Older Adult. And this piece is really kind of that critical piece that has not been discussed much, that will be also a portion of that continuing education course. So if you like this, feel free when you start seeing info about that course to check that out as well. Okay, so let's get moving. First of all, I also, along with being a faculty member at University of San Francisco, I have my own fitness consulting company, Thompson Fitness Solutions, and our whole goal is really to develop, design, and implement very fun, challenging, and safe fitness programs to confer and consult with whether it's facilities or trainers that want to improve on what they deliver. And it's just been great to have the opportunity to connect with so many people through the work that I do with Functional Aging Institute. So this is truly an amazing organization, and I'm thankful to be a part of it. I do also have an online fitness assessment and program design platform called Mobility Matters. Some of you have checked that out. That's at mobilitymatters.fit. You'll see that at the end of today's presentation. So our objectives today, and being a faculty member at a four-year university, I'm very used to structuring presentations to have our learning outcomes and objectives early on. So we really want to talk about what the recommendations are and how they've changed to gather this really important health information about older clients that might be coming in as you're as a training client or as a member of a group exercise program. We also want to discuss this topic of medical clearance, which unfortunately became quite a barrier for many older adults. And it began to be found that requiring medical release was doing more harm than good in terms of getting people to participate in training programs. And then talk about just a process by which we can ask some pertinent questions that reveal good information. Then we'll get into health behavior theory, just a little touch on that, and then transition from kind of the theoretical into the practical, how we can start to gather more information and really allow the client or the participant to take more ownership over their buy-in to the training program that we're going to be taking them through. So we'll talk about this concept of motivational interviewing, something we do quite a bit with our participants in our program in San Francisco and also with some of my clients. Okay, so first of all, right off the bat, the reason why we need to do some pre-participation work is because this is our chosen profession. And the most important thing that we need to do is ensure that we're taking adequate steps to protect it. Liability, we live in the United States, the most litigious country on the face of the earth. And liability really is everywhere out there, from professional liability, what you are developing and delivering as far as programs go, the way that you interact with and the situations you put your clients into, the premises where you are delivering your program. If you're part of a gym or a studio, the premises is that facility. If you do outdoor training, your outdoor space are your premises. And we need to recognize that all of those locations do have inherent challenges and potential dangers associated with them. And we have responsibility to ensure that we're reducing risk as much as we can to our clientele. Equipment that we use, obviously equipment can go haywire, things can be used inappropriately and ineffectively and can cause big problems with our clientele. There was just an article in the most recent ACSM Health Fitness Journal that was revisiting a treadmill liability suit. 24 Hour Fitness got sued for a woman who flew off the back of a treadmill, and because there was another piece of equipment less than 6 feet behind her, which is per manufacturer's recommendation, she hit her head on a metal base of a leg press machine, essentially had a skull fracture, and ended up settling for a very large sum of money. So equipment and also placement of equipment, a big issue. And then the way that we communicate with our clientele as well. So what can we do to limit our liability, right? A lot of it has to do with ensuring that we take time before we really start training these people to get a good picture of what they look like and the things we need to be aware of and mindful of as we go about delivering our training programs to them. It's possible that some may require medical clearance as well. We'll discuss that process. And obviously, all of us should be seeking liability protection, even if we are a trainer at a gym that has its own facility liability protection, which does extend to us. We should all be purchasing our own professional liability protection as well. Because here's what might happen. This article details something that happened a few years ago. A trainer had put an older adult on the flip side, the flat side of a BOSU. The woman basically used it as a trampoline, flew through midair, and had a humongous injury that was associated with almost a $1 million settlement that went against the personal trainer and also the facility. So we need to be careful about that. Certainly knowing that we want to challenge our older adults in our training programs. More often than not, unfortunately, they are a little unaware of what their capacities are and tend to perhaps deliver to themselves programs that just aren't quite challenging enough to elicit a stimulus that will have them adapt and improve in their function. And we need to ensure that we're giving them a stimulus that will allow them to adapt and improve in their function. It's been great being at the summit this year, listening to Robert Linkle talk about power training, listening to Paul Holbrook talk about speed and reactive training. All of those elements are things that should be a part of every older adults training program, but we also need to make sure that we're delivering them in a safe and effective process and a safe and effective manner. So let's talk about this pre-participation screening process. So really, when somebody comes in the door to our facility or sends an email to us for the first time saying, I'd love to work with you, or calls us on the phone or reaches out via social media, it's a potential client, it's a potential participant, but it's also a black box. We don't really know what this person is going to be presenting with. So we need to take time to ensure that we uncover the specifics that are going to be necessary for us to know in order for them to have identified the dangerous conditions that may pose problems with us when it comes to exercising. There is a form that's been in use for many, many, many years now. You guys all do have a handout packet that is posted on the FAI site specific for this presentation. That packet, at the end of the packet, it has the PAR-Q Plus. So the PAR-Q is essentially a very basic health history form that identifies the most important issues that may present problems for somebody when they're engaging in exercise. So it doesn't dig into all of a person's health history, but it talks about the big things that could be problematic: cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, pulmonary disease, and also potential issues with renal function, kidney function. So let's briefly look at the PAR-Q Plus and just note that the PAR-Q Plus is different than the previous iteration of the PAR-Q that was prior to 2015. And we generally just had a one-page PAR-Q that asked people if they had cardiovascular issues, or if they had metabolic issues, or if they had pulmonary issues. So I'm going to minimize here. I'm actually going to change my share. I'm going to go to a different share for us. So let me minimize this for a moment. I'm going to stop sharing. Then I'm going to share the PAR-Q Plus and go back to sharing screen with you guys. Just bouncing all over the place here. Bear with me for a moment. All right, so here's the 2021 PAR-Q Plus form, Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire for everyone. So it starts with 7 basic questions. These are the same questions that were part of the previous iteration of the PAR-Q. And really, this is telling us whether we should have an individual seek further evaluation, whether it's from us or from medical professionals, prior to really engaging in a new training program. So we can see that a lot of the issues in these first 7 questions include chronic medical conditions that could be problematic. Heart conditions, high blood pressure. If people are symptomatic either during exercise or during their day with a heart condition, perhaps they're sensing chest pain or heaviness in the chest when they're exercising, or even when they're not exercising. Do they have near syncope? Do they get dizzy when they're going through activity? That could be either hypotension or could be an arrhythmia that is leading to poor blood flow up to the brain. Those are things we need to be aware of. And if people answer yes to any of these 7 questions, the PAR-Q Plus then recommends that you continue on to additional follow-up questions. And these follow-up questions include things for our osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, back issues, more info concerning other diseases, cancer, heart, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, metabolic conditions, etc. Goes on to respiratory disease, COPD, things like asks about issues with neurological problems such as spinal cord injury or stroke or other medical conditions. So it can either be a very simple, if a person answers no to the first 7, then you're pretty much in good shape. You can ask them to sign the form and you're ready to start engaging them in kind of the next step of the pre-participation process. If somebody answers yes to any of these first 7 questions, we then go to the other elements associated with the PAR-Q Plus in order to determine the magnitude of the issues they might be presenting with. And then we can kind of connect that to some of the other steps of the pre-participation screening we're about to discuss to determine whether it rises to the level of really needing physician release, to have somebody go out and get clearance from a physician or another medical professional. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to go back to my presentation, and we'll start sharing the Prezi again. And I'm going to go back up to exactly where we were before. Okay, fantastic. Now, decide on whether or not we need medical clearance. So the PAR-Q Plus is going to help give us an idea of some of the medical conditions a person might be dealing with. And definitely, if we see somebody is symptomatic, they have chest pain during physical activity, they have chest pain when they're not being physically active, that pretty much is a flag that tells us, hey, they should go off and seek medical attention and get some sort of a medical clearance form signed off and brought back to us before we feel comfortable going into assessment and also going into programming steps for that individual. There's a flow chart that has been put out pretty recently by the American College of Sports Medicine. This also is within your handout, but really it's just part of the slide, the next slide. So because this is pretty small on your handout, I'm actually going to open up the document. So I'm going to share screen again, but recognize you do have this in your handouts, and it's the pre-participation health screening that's been recommended by the American College of Sports Medicine, which, as we know, is very good on the kind of general public recommendations side of exercise programming for Americans. They might not be absolutely at the cutting edge of designing training programs, but they're really, really good at helping with the processes involved with ensuring that we're delivering kind of the right risk stratification and screening process before we get people into our training programs. So again, I'm going to minimize. I'm going to go back, stop share here. I'm going to open up the risk chart, and I will share the risk chart with you guys now. A year plus of online instruction at the university comes in big time handy when I'm bouncing around these different PDFs through presentations like this. So what ACSM really recognized was that too often medical clearance was presenting itself as an obstacle or a barrier to physical activity. An older adult was given a medical release form and said, you can't exercise with us until you get this filled out by your doctor. And perhaps somebody who's older, they have transportation issues, so they can't easily get out to their doctor's office. They maybe don't have the wherewithal to be able to email it to their doctor and advise it to be emailed back to the exercise professional, so they feel like they have to go and visit the office. Some people haven't really communicated with their physician on too regular of a basis, so they see that as a barrier. So really, ACSM started thinking, let's remove this obstacle for all of those people except those for whom it might be a very important and informative process to go through. So exercise is great for most people. We don't want to reduce and create barriers that aren't necessarily there. So most people can exercise, and this includes older adults, without necessarily visiting a doctor first. So here's the screening flow chart. First of all, it really is based on whether the individual is currently physically active or not. And it's much less restrictive for those people who have been regularly active. So if they're engaging in a walking program at home, or they're a member of a gym and they're doing their own stuff and now they're coming to you to be their trainer, or they're just engaged in other physical activity, but they want to add your services to the tapestry of their training, we tend to be much more open to allowing those folks who already are active to not need to seek medical clearance. So if somebody's already active, do they have diagnosed cardiovascular, metabolic, or renal disease, or signs or symptoms that are suggestive that they do? Okay, well, if they don't have signs or symptoms, no medical clearance is necessary to continue because they're already active. And as long as you follow good guidelines, ensuring that you're not putting them into super 100% hit training programs right off the bat, you're probably in good shape. Now, if they do have diagnosed conditions, however, they're asymptomatic, if they're asymptomatic, then again, they can pretty much continue to engage in exercise and you can start working with them. If they are symptomatic, then it's possible, if those symptoms and those signs are suggestive of cardiovascular, metabolic, or renal disease, probably a good idea to say, you know what, let's go out and get this double checked before we do anything further. And it might be a good idea even for you to discontinue your current program if you're getting chest pain when you're out walking, or if you're getting incredibly short of breath during your yoga class. Let's just kind of put a hold on that and go and see your medical professional first. But again, if they really don't have those signs and symptoms, then they should be able to continue moderate to even some more vigorous training programs. Now, if they aren't regularly active and they have cardiovascular, metabolic, or renal disease, they have that diagnosed, or signs and symptoms that they have that those diseases, we really do recommend that right off the bat, we urge them to get medical clearance because they haven't been regularly active. We don't know what their tolerance to physical activity is. And we just don't want to put them in a situation where that could get exacerbated in their first training session with us and could be problematic. Now, if they don't have those signs and symptoms, then again, even though they're not regularly active, we can start them in on, and perhaps we start more moderate and don't incorporate a lot of vigorous until we get maybe a few sessions in. So we see how they respond, perhaps using an RPE scale or something of that nature, to our first couple of training sessions. But the nice thing is it really pares it down to a much smaller percentage of folks for whom we're asking to go be medically cleared, versus giving every person over the age of 60 or 65 a medical clearance form, even if they're running marathons or regularly visiting a gym. That's just a barrier that we don't necessarily want to have to jump over, a hoop we don't want to have them have to jump through. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this one, go back to the PowerPoint, and we will continue on. Additionally, another thing that we probably want to do, along with getting basic information about essentially their medical status, is a little bit more about their health history. And their health history form really should be informing us of things beyond just their medical issues. We want to get an idea of other conditions that may run in their family, other behaviors that they might have, hobbies and occupations and interests that could definitely play a role, not only in perhaps leading to some issues that we'll identify during assessment and programming, but also could help us with goal setting and being specific. If somebody lets us know that, hey, my primary hobby is golf and I play a lot of golf, we should be thinking, okay, how do we craft our assessment process and our program design to ensure that we're showing them that specificity of training so that we might be able to connect their training program to something that they love or enjoy. Or perhaps if they're a bird watcher, well, we know that they're probably out there walking a lot, oftentimes on rugged terrain, maybe not always paying attention to where they're walking. They're doing a lot of cervical extension as they're looking up with their binoculars. So again, that gives us some information about stuff we might want to implement into their training programs, and also things that we're just making mental notes about perhaps monitoring during assessments that we do, because it could predispose them to have certain movement dysfunction that then we can pick up on if we're looking for those things. So I've got a health history form that I'm going to show you guys really quickly. It's several pages, so I didn't include this in your packet, but I'm sure many of you have health history forms that you can go through, and you can find boilerplates all over the place. So I'm going to once again do a new share of this health history form, and we can take a little look at that. Give me 1 second. All right. And here we go. Going to share. All right. So this is a health history form that I'd used previously as I ran some of my fall prevention and balance training clinics. We really want to get just basic information so we can contact people. We also want to know, in order, I just went to Hartmutt's presentation on frailty, and part of what Hartmut talked about was this process of developing a little bit of a clinical team that you can get referrals from and connect with. So by getting information about the individual's private physician or their specialty physicians, you can proactively reach out to those people, let them know that you're working with one of their patients, and see if there might be any recommendations on what they would recommend you do or not do. Additionally, it might be good to even connect with them and see if you can meet with them and do an in-service during a lunch period during their clinic hours, so that they can meet you and other people in the office can meet you. Could become a very powerful referral source as well. Additionally, we always want an emergency contact as well. Not a bad idea to get some information about family history of bad things such as sudden death. Also information about diabetes, just a bunch of info here. These are all generally relative and absolute contraindications that have been put forth by the American College of Sports Medicine. A lot of these things our clients probably won't even know if they have these things. So it's like, well, what's a dissecting aneurysm? Well, if you have a dissecting aneurysm, probably not a great thing. So these are some more technical terms that our clients might not necessarily fully know about. Also, we make sure we talk about musculoskeletal joint issues that might be bothering them. Doing a lot of balance training, I specifically ask about falls and how often they fall, or if they've had any falls and what the circumstances are. Anybody can fall once, but when people start falling over and over again, it's usually indicative of some sort of intrinsic issue going on within the person's body that we need to be aware of and may need some additional assessment. Also, always knowing what medications people might be on. There could be interactions between medications. Individual medications could be problematic. You have somebody who's on an antihypertensive medication, such as a beta blocker or a diuretic. It might make things like quick power training, quick stands to sits, chair stands to chair sits, or doing something like the timed up and go test. The person could get dizzy doing that assessment because of the side effect of antihypertensives, leading to that temporary postural hypotension, which isn't necessarily a thing. So we want to take that into account. Also talking about other health related behaviors, whether someone's smoking, what their physical activity happens to be, and again, recreational activities and behaviors. So feel free to construct one that really kind of fits with what your participants and clientele look like. If they're a much more athletic population, you might want to gather more information about sports injuries they might be dealing with, or events that they're striving toward, or what they tend to do well and not well in their sport conditioning and their sport performance. And if they're more on the lower end of the spectrum, you can add in more things such as tell us about your ADLs and your IADLs. How well are you able to take care of just basic functions? So we can modulate these health history forms to be very specific to the participants that we are working with. And before we go back, and I promise we're not going to bounce back and forth between a lot of other documents, but I do want to quickly show you a boilerplate from the National Strength and Conditioning Association of a physician release form. So if somebody is recommended for physician release, you can find boilerplate forms on a number of different certifying organizations' websites. And I'm just going to show you one right now real quickly. And this is the National Academy or the National Strength and Conditioning Association's version. And you can find these on websites of these organizations. So it's a physician referral form, and it pretty much just talks about the general physical conditioning of a patient that they might have, lets them know that you're going to be working with them in both assessment and programming, a recommendation for any restrictions or things that they really want you to be focusing on to help improve their patient's function, and obviously have them kind of sign off on that as well, so that you've got that piece of documentation in that particular client's file. So a good thing for us to have, just to cover all our bases and check off all the boxes if that individual is via the flow chart recommended for a physician or some type of a medical release. Okay, moving on. I think we're now on to hopefully more of the fun stuff. And here we go. All right. As we know, as I just mentioned, times they're changing. Now we have very few older adults that really need that. So that's good. We used to offer or require physician release for all of the participants in our community-wide Always Active program, which has about 1,000 participants in and around San Francisco, California. We offered programs at over 20 different senior centers, and too often people show up and then not come back. And when we asked them why they weren't coming back, they were frustrated by this medical release piece. So now we have adopted the new recommendations, and people are suggested to talk to their doctor, but are only given medical release forms if essentially they answer yes on those first 7 questions on the PAR-Q Plus. Okay, there's the screening form again. Your handouts, you get out as well by doing you right to this flow chart. Some recommendations that might be valuable, and I was really happy. Oops, I've got an unstable internet connection. Hopefully I am back. Some additional recommendations that were echoed in a couple of other presentations this weekend, aside from just gathering information about a person's health, their history, it wouldn't be a bad idea to adopt this concept of a comprehensive metric assessment. There is actually going to be an article coming out in the next ACSM Health Fitness Journal, written by a pioneer in physical activity and aging, Maria Fiatarone. She wrote one of the first studies on with older adults back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And she's working with her work group on adapting essentially how we do intake with adults, community-based settings and our applied settings. And her recommendation is basically to take some of the content that we've learned from more clinical geriatric assessment, which include getting information about their emotional health, information about their injury history, getting information their dietary habits, because oftentimes physical activity, they're interconnected. If a person has poor protein intake, poor vitamin D intake, it's very difficult for us to expect that they're going to have good muscle function to start with, and they might not really adapt effectively to our muscle power training programs, because simply they don't have the nutritional support in their diet to allow them to improve that aspect of function. It's a good idea to ask them about their sleeping patterns. My students at USF, they're mostly 20 to 22-year-old students, 18 to 22 years old. If they get a couple bad night sleeps in a row, it's not really going to affect them. If you have an older adult who has a bad night's sleep, it could tremendously affect their ability to perform well in a training setting. You need to be aware of kind of these elements that are going to exert some sort of an influence or some sort of an effect on how well they go through an entire training program or even an individual training session. So it's not a bad idea to just have a little checkoff list that you discuss with the prior to each training session. Make sure they took vacations, find out how they're doing with their nutrition over the last 24 hours, find out how well they slept, and those kind of will get you prepared to knowing what they might be able to do and what they might not be able to do for that particular session, okay? Also a really good idea to get information about pain and if they're experiencing any pain. Okay, so that's all of kind of the objective data collection pieces that are really, really good for us to ensure that we get a good snapshot of what this potential client or participant looks like, and we know that we can kind of get started on the right foot by assessing and programming appropriately and safely with them. But looking beyond kind of the job of delivering training programs, we also really want to think about how we can lead this whole process. And lead, when it comes to older adults, oftentimes means that you are really alongside your client or your participant. You are not necessarily going to be the one that's talking all the time, delivering all the information. We really want to be more the guide by the side. So we are on the journey with our clients. We're on this journey with our patients. And we really do affect a ton of aspects in their lives beyond just developing kind of their functional fitness and improving their functional fitness. With those improvements come things like developing their self-esteem and their self-efficacy. And this is amazing. I mean, I think almost all of us who have worked with older adults, one of the biggest reasons that we love doing this is that we know the work that we do and the work that we help facilitate with them leads to absolute improvements in quality of life. They're doing more stuff, they're engaging in more things, they're more confident in their lives. And that is absolutely huge because that's what contributes to an overall improvement in the quality of older adults' lives. So what we do with them, whether it's 2, 3, 4 days per week for an hour at a time, is having an effect throughout their entire life. And it's so powerful to know that. And we can really be effective at helping to provide the motivation that is necessary to elicit behavior change. And behavior change is very, very difficult in any age group, in any demographic segment, and definitely very difficult when you get an older adult who may not have had a lot of good experience with exercise, had very negative experiences. Maybe they fell when they were exercising. Maybe they had a trainer that hurt them. Maybe they just never were really athletic and they're thinking, wow, late in life, I can't be athletic now. I was never athletic before. So we have to kind of help them facilitate that behavior change process. So we're going to look at some tools that are effective at doing that and really assist us with our leadership process. But recognize facilitating behavior change, not easy. A great example for that always kind of like just disturbs me and frustrates me. And I've talked to Robert Linkle, one of my buddies with the Age Well Collective, quite a bit about this. Less than 10% of older adults engage in basically what the standard resistance training recommendation is that's out there, 2 to 4 days a week, and ensuring that you're exercising most major muscle groups and you're using something other than a 1 pound weight. And less than 10% of older adults are engaging in that sort of training because they have a lot of myths and concerns and worries. And they tend to just feel like strength training and resistance training is for the younger people. I need to focus on things like walking because I won't necessarily be endangered or get hurt. Or maybe I can do a little yoga class because I feel I can work on my balance, but it doesn't require me to lift anything. So facilitating behavior change and getting people confident to adopt new behavior is not easy. Let's go in and look at a couple of health behavior theories, okay? Some models that assist us with understanding why it's so challenging. So we've got one, this is actually called the health belief model, not the health behavior model. And this is kind of an interesting model. It lets us know what will predispose a person to engage in a health promoting behavior or not. And it really has to do with whether somebody has greater perceived benefits or barriers to adopting that behavior. If they really see that there's a threat if they don't adopt that behavior, what their own self-efficacy is. In other words, self-efficacy is the ability, a person's belief that they can engage successfully in some specific activity. It's very situation specific, right? So I feel like, yeah, I have good self-efficacy that I can swing a golf club because I play golf. So situationally, my self-efficacy for golf is very good. But if you said, all right, I'm going to have you go out and play racquetball. I haven't played a lot of racquetball in my life, so I would have much lower situational self-efficacy in playing another side-on sport such as racquetball. So self-efficacy, how well a person believes that they can engage specifically in that activity. They might have high self-efficacy in a lot of other areas, but if you're asking them to do something that they're uncomfortable with, they would have low self-efficacy, and we need to work on building that to get them feeling more confident and more successful. And then finally, do they have any cues to action? Are there reasons for them to adopt this new behavior that are kind of cues that, boy, if I better do this because, and it's possible it's somebody within their family who just got diagnosed with heart disease. Well, I've not exercised much before, but wow, I just noticed that my brother, who's younger than me, he just had a scare and he just went in for angioplasty. He had some blocked arteries in his coronary vasculature. That would be a good cue to action to help motivate somebody to a new behavior. Or, wow, somebody's been doing this new exercise program and they went to Europe and they had the best time and they did all these active things. That really wants me, I want to do those things. So that might be action to engage in a health promoting behavior as well. Now, many of these are modified by different things, such as age, socioeconomic status, education, cultural differences. So it's possible that those will play a role in having somebody feel a bit differently than another person on whether there are benefits or barriers, whether there's a threat or not, and their situational self-efficacy. Additionally, a big thing that focuses on perceived threat would be if they believe the issue is serious and if they believe they're really susceptible to this particular issue. And this is really very well illustrated with the COVID-19 pandemic that we are hopefully starting to come out of. Tons of students of mine at USF, they said early on the pandemic, there's no way, I don't need to get vaccinated. I hear that no young people are really negatively affected by COVID-19. So they were kind of very, they didn't really perceive a seriousness of the issue. And they really didn't perceive that they were susceptible to this particular issue until a few of them started getting COVID-19. They get diagnosed positive. They felt none of them had to go to the hospital. They probably weren't at risk for hospitalization, but they felt like not good for several days on end. I had a friend of mine, I'm about to turn 50 next week, 50th birthday coming up on June 17th. I have a friend that's about to turn 50, college athlete, and but pretty inactive now. He spent 6 days in the hospital in Kansas City with COVID because his pulse ox dropped to 60. It was basically like being on the top of Mount Everest, the poor guy. So we need to ensure that people might not perceive that it's a serious issue that needs to be addressed through a behavior change, or they might not feel that they're susceptible. So our goal is to use a model like this to really start understanding why people have different perceptions and what might be effective at helping us to move them toward that desired health behavior that we'd like to adopt. So the health belief model is a really, really good model. Additionally, we have another model, just the last model we're going to talk about is the trans-theoretical model, also known as the stages of change model. Many of us have seen that. Really, the goal is to get all of our current and future clients to the level of maintenance where they are maintaining, meaning basically they have created this physical activity program as a habit. They have it scheduled, they do it. It's just a part of the fabric of their daily life or their weekly life, and they're not going to miss it. Unfortunately, many people start down in the pre-contemplation step where they're not even thinking about starting a training program. They're busy with other things. They're busy with their careers, their jobs, their other interests. They're busy with their grandchildren. They're busy with managing medical conditions that they're having to deal with, which creates a lot of time and stress. So the last thing that they're thinking about is, oh, it might be a great idea for me to become more physically active. So our goal is, as we kind of use this model as a guide, to try to use different strategies to move them from pre-contemplation to contemplation, Maybe it's educating them about the benefit of physical activity and managing chronic conditions that might get them from not ready to even think about starting to exercise to be like, wow, I can actually lower my blood pressure by adopting a walking program. Okay, I'm going to start, maybe I'll start thinking about what I need to do. I probably have to go and get some shoes. Maybe I have to figure out a good place in my neighborhood to walk. So then they're in kind of that getting ready or contemplation stage. Then when they are ready, okay, they've bought the shoes, they know their process, they know their map. What's going to help them start taking action? So how can we facilitate that, right? How can we get them? And maybe it's us coming to them and walking with them. Maybe we reach out to them on phone calls, texts, Zooms, and encourage them and check in with them to have them start taking action. And then taking them from action to maintenance. How does that become a habit? So the thought is, how do we kind of just ensure that it's not something that dwindles and goes away after 4 to 6 weeks, but they actually stick with it and it becomes a process that they enjoy, they love, and really becomes a part of who they are. And then we engage in different strategies to help them do that. So those are a couple of models that kind of set the scene for behavior change that we can take action with, and really starting right away with our particular clients and patients. So we want to build rapport. A lot of older adults are very used to not feeling listened to, right? They have about 6-7 minutes in front of a doctor. Generally, a doctor is going to start formulating in his or her own mind some diagnostic sort of differential pathway. So older adults are used to kind of feeling like they're not being heard. So this process involves listening. We want to make sure that they know we are listening to them. And that's going to make them value right off the bat, because what everyone wants to be is heard. And we really want to get them to arrive at the why. What's the why? Why are they coming to see us? What can we do to help them? And this is all going to be facilitated by what we call motivational interviewing. So here's Jack, one of my clients in San Francisco. Motivational interviewing started back in the 1980s, utilized in substance abuse treatment programs. The goal really is to not tell the person the what. Okay, well, we're going to be engaging in 2 days of training per week, and we're going to work on these different muscle groups. We're going to implement this whole honeycomb exercise program put forward by the Functional Aging Institute. That's the what, but really what's going to hook them is the why. You have them figure out why they're doing this. Why are they with you? How is it going to benefit their life? How can it help them reach their more ideal self? So motivational interviewing includes a client-centered process. It's very client-driven. They do most of the talking, you do most of the listening, and the goal is to enhance their own intrinsic motivation, which then will take that step from action to maintenance, because then they have a reason. They always can remind themselves of the why, and that's what gets them up in the morning to do their exercise, or that what gets them driving to your facility. They always have the why close at hand, and it helps to reinforce that behavior. Okay, so motivational interviewing, how to do it. You really guide the conversation. The goal is to explore what their point of view happens to be, and you encourage change talk, and you really avoid the barrier talk. The barrier talk, people like to talk about all the barriers they have. They like to talk about all the things that they're worried about with a training program, their fears. They like to talk about the habits that they currently have that might take a hit if they introduce a new activity. So we steer them away from that stuff, and we focus primarily on the change. And we're going to go through a couple of activities in just a moment. The core skills, we ask open-ended questions. Nothing is more of a buzzkill at the start of a motivational interviewing session or a discussion with a client of yours or a would-be client saying, wow, I'm really glad you're here. So you must love to exercise. No. If their first answer is no, I don't love to exercise, that's not a good way to get a relationship off to a good start. So always ask open-ended questions. You might want to ask them, so why is it that you chose to come here today and want to engage in exercise? And maybe they say something negative. Well, my daughter had me come here. Well, why do you think your daughter wants you to come and work with me? What are the things that your daughter's interested in? What is she concerned about? And it gets the person talking, gets them talking about kind of what their life is like, what their issues might be. We always provide affirmations. It's always, well, thank you for telling me that. Oh, I appreciate you telling me that. So that they kind of are getting this positive affirmation that can continue to have them continue to talk, right? We also want to reflect what I heard you say, because we may misinterpret what they happen to say. So every so often, what I heard you say was that you think your daughter is really concerned about the fact that you don't go see your doctor very much and there may be some issues. Is that right? The person will say, yeah, that's right. But also I think she's concerned about what I eat, because she sees that maybe she thinks I don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. Boom. So you're thinking, okay, well, nutrition education may want to be a part of what I'm providing information for during this training program as well. So it helps to inform you about things that you might want to work into their program, and also helps to reinforce to them that they are being heard, and always sort of summarize that information as well. Now, there are some good resources to utilize instead of just starting with random questions that might not necessarily connect. So we're going to go through a couple of activities. The decisional balance sheet. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen decisional balance sheet before, which pretty much gives us the pros and cons of adopting behaviors or not adopting behaviors, staying status quo. And then we'll also talk about importance and confidence scales. So let's take a look at a decisional balance sheet. So you guys, there are a ton of them that you can find online as well. You can utilize this one. You can blow it up. It's on your handout right now. You can make it a little bit bigger. And the whole goal here is to get the person thinking and talking to you about what their life would be like if they chose to adopt a new behavior, or if they chose to continue with a new continue with their current behavior, or if they consciously chose not to adopt a behavior, or consciously chose not to continue a current behavior that might not be so good. So it's a quadrant sort of thing. And the elements within this decisional balance sheet really will help to reveal the disadvantage of no change. So what are some of the issues that you think might present themselves if you don't become more physically active? And that's where the person will start talking about fears. Well, I've been gaining weight. I'm really concerned about gaining more weight. Last time I got my blood checked, I had really a poor lipid profile. I'm worried that's going to get worse. I'm worried I'm not going to be able to get down on the floor to hang out with my grandkids. I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to take this trip on my bucket list. So they start talking about the fears they have, where they see their life going if they don't make a change. So that's really important content for you to hold on to. And you can start showing them that physical activity and other healthy behaviors are going to help facilitate can be solutions to those particular issues. Now let's go to the opposite. The advantages of change, the opposite of disadvantages of no change. It helps them think about their best self. It helps them focus on, wow, if I do change, I'm going to get my energy back. I'm going to be able to get the most out of my trip to Europe. I'm going to be able to get back to playing my best golf or my best tennis. I'm going to be able to be around for my grandkids and see them graduate from high school. So this is the why. This is to the whys that you always focus on when you're taking them through their dual training sessions and throughout their training program. It's you to know they value, and you can always be connecting with the stuff that they value in the conversations you have with them when you're training them, sort of thing. Advantages of no change, it gets to their habits. What are their habits that don't make space for the new behavior? So that's where we start focusing on, here's how we might be able to fit in physical activity in these places. So we kind of get them out of the barriers or the habits that they already have and thinking about the places where they might be able to add more physical activity and become more advantageous. And then the disadvantages of change are their excuses. I just, I don't have any time. It's going to take time away from other stuff or more emotional stuff. Well, I've tried before and I always end up quitting. So I'd rather just not even give it a shot because trying to change makes me feel bad about myself. So you start finding their excuses and you can start problem solving and you sort of gear them away from the excuses and the fears and the habits and start focusing more on aspiration. So that's the use of a decisional balance sheet. Using open-ended questions to start filling in this grid can be incredibly, incredibly helpful. We're going to go through a case study in just a moment. Now, the other thing that we can use that are helpful are 1 to 10 scales. Okay, and I didn't provide any handout for that because you can make your own 1 to 10 scale or find 1 to 10 scales all over the place. What we really want to do is see what level of motivation they have and what the level of self-efficacy they have. So it helps them generate change talk. So we would do a 0 to 10 scale twice. We would say, how important is it for you to become more physically active or whatever they're coming to you for? How important is this change to you? And they will give you a number. Oh, I'd put that as a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. You'd say, oh, well, all right. Well, why is it a 7 instead of a 2? And immediately they'll think, well, it's important at a level of 7 to me because of, instead of a 2, because of this, because I just had a grandkid and I want to get in shape for that grandkid. Boom. That's the motivation. That is the why right there. So if you ask them why they chose one number versus a lower number, you have them immediately think about what's the why. And again, that's what you focus on during your training with the person in the dog days of the training sessions where they're like, oh God, I've been seeing this guy, he tells bad jokes, whatever it might be, but always connect to that why. It identifies the why. And then how confident are you can make this change? So they might say, well, I'm a 4. The question is, what would it take for you to go from a 4 to a 9? So you're asking them, what's a strategy that will help you get up to a number 9? And maybe it's like, I just need a reminder, or I really need to feel supported. Okay, well, now you're following up with emails, calls, texts. You're encouraging husbands, wives, adult children, people in their social network to always be encouraging to them and send them, hey, you did a workout, looking great, you're feeling great. How's that training program going for you? So we're building in the strategies that help them kind of improve their confidence. So again, for the motivation piece, we go from what number they choose and ask them why it's not a lower number. That gives you the why. For the confidence piece, you take their number and ask them how they could get to a higher number, which helps to give the strategies that will get them more adherent and more confident, less bail on the training program. Okay, so let's apply this to a case study. Let's say we got Julia. She's a 70-year-old former competitive soccer player. She's a hiker. She's a tennis player. She's traveling to Europe in 4 months. She wants really to be ready for sightseeing, but her health history indicates, well, she's got right hip osteoarthritis that bothers her quite a bit, and she has plantar fasciitis in both feet. So let's take her through a decisional balance sheet. Let's say that these are her answers. The disadvantage to no change. Well, she knows that if she continues on this path, her hip keeps feeling worse and worse. She might need a hip replacement sometime soon. She knows that she probably, if she's not feeling good now, in 4 months, she'll still not feel good, and she's going to be in pain when she goes to Europe. She knows that, hey, I'm probably going to need to quit tennis at some point, at least temporarily as I'm rehabbing from my hip replacement. So those are the disadvantages of no change. If she continues status quo, she sees these bad things happening, okay? And what if she does change? What's the advantage of changing? What's the ideal situation? Wow, I can do the Spanish steps in Rome. I've always wanted to do that, but man, even taking a few steps at home hurts my hip. Maybe I'll get better at tennis. So I'll be able to start kicking butt on the tennis court. I know I've kind of like not been as good lately. I can take longer and tougher hikes. I'm going to have less pain in my feet and my hips. So that's all the good stuff, the stuff that we really want to focus on when we're encouraging her during those training programs. Now, what's an advantage of no change? Well, I'm pretty good as is. I play tennis. I hike. I used to be a collegiate or competitive athlete. I'm in good shape. Oh, and I could just keep living my life. I don't need to have to build in something new. So that's kind of the habits that we want to have them start finding spaces to build in additional or new beneficial habits as well. And the disadvantages of change, right? And again, these are kind of the excuses. It takes time. Maybe it takes money. It hurts my feet when I exercise. It hurts my hips when I exercise. So those things are the disadvantages of change and the excuses that she ends up making. So we want to really ensure that we focus on that bottom right corner and have strategies to deal with these other three quadrants. Now, let's say we ask her about her confidence and importance scales. Let's say she gave us a 6 for importance. Well, why a 6 and not a 2? Well, it's a 6 because, I really, this Europe trip is a bucket list thing. I want to do it. I've got to do it. So I want it to go well. So that's why it's a 6 instead of a 2. Oh, that's good. That gives us right there. Boom. She really is excited about this. And then confidence. Okay, it's an 8. What could we do to make it a 10? Well, I'm already confident because I've been very active and athletic before. But what could make it 10 is I really need some strategies to ensure that my feet and my hip don't hurt while I'm out there training. So then we start thinking about, okay, well, maybe we start considering referring her to massage therapists that we might know, maybe doing some ART, maybe trying to get her to people that can really help with that preventative maintenance piece that will improve her confidence, knowing that if we help get her out of pain, she's going to be even more adherent to that training program. So really, really, really good ways for us to move her along this spectrum. All right, I know it's almost out, actually it is out of time, but I've got a few minutes and I'd love to take some questions from you guys. I really thank you. I hope this has been helpful. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all again in other FAI events. So happy to take some questions.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Christian Thompson, in the nice purple shirt. I love there.
Love this shirt.
All right, so let's open it up for some questions. And a comment that came in very early on, which I really like, was talking about the perception of risk, that an older adult might have versus actual risk, and basically saying their own paradigm often inhibits their progress, which can be a challenge. You want to speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, I'm a little unstable with my internet right now, but
okay right now.
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah, unfortunately, living in the society we are, a very ageist society, people tend to have kind of a lowest common denominator about their perceptions. They've been told way too often that their abilities or their capabilities are relatively low. So, what I like to do is just have them celebrate the good. Working in fall prevention, I tell them, hey, how long did your last fall take? Oh, I fell. It probably took me a second to go from standing to the ground. Like, well, okay, we just spent 60 minutes in this training session today. I will take 60 minutes of prevention to battle a 1-second issue. So we start getting them just kind of reframing their perception from being less capable, more problematic, to successful, pursuing something and making progress with something. Even if it's just one training session, that is still making progress. So we focus on the good, celebrate the good.
A good deal. Well, one of the things that you really focused on was kind of the shift in trying to screen everybody out, screen all these older adults out, which obviously has been a big barrier. We've been around long enough that fortunately things have shifted. But there certainly are still people that do need to get that medical clearance. What are some of the most common things that you've been seeing that you think require some of the medical clearance?
Yeah. So we go through a screening process for all of our participants coming into our Always Active program. I run all the screenings. I mean, it's like a lot of them. The things we really get concerned about are those first 7 questions. If they answer yes on the PAR-Q plus, follow up with questions. Okay, you say that you have chest pain. Maybe after talking to them a little bit, you realize it's probably gastric reflux, and probably not actual chest pain from angina. So we can kind of follow up with those questions. If somebody says, I have no pain in my chest except when I start climbing stairs or walking briskly, that's a red flag, right? There's a difference between feeling fatigued and really having true shortness of breath, right? If somebody has shortness of breath where they're kind of reflexively doing their pursed lip breathing, that's immediately telling me there's probably something clinical going on from a pulmonary standpoint versus just feeling fatigued and a little bit out of breath because they're working above their anaerobic threshold. So we have to kind of just do a couple of follow-ups, even when somebody answers yes on those questions, just to ensure that they don't freak out and we're really identifying truly a problem that needs to be medically evaluated. Now, if they can't answer kind of those follow-up questions and they're not sure, then it's best to err on the side of caution and say, we're going to ask you to go and speak to a medical professional. Here's our medical release form, and we'll help you facilitate that if you need to. We can reach out to your doctor for you, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. So here's another question I think that's very relevant is, what are you seeing as some of those common forms of resistance to exercise, that people are, maybe they're forced to come in, or they're coming in because other people have told them to, or whatever, a spouse brought them in. What are some of those forms of resistance that you're finding in folks?
Yeah, I generally kind of have it in 2 categories. First of all, a lot of people have either not been active for a long time or have had some really bad experiences, right? Maybe their hip that just started hurting a few months ago, it started hurting when they were out doing a hike or when they're out sightseeing. So they kind of start connecting the physical pain and discomfort to being physically active. And that can be a powerful demotivator. Another element that is very common as a piece of resistance would be sort of this sense that I'm being made to do this by a husband, a wife, an adult son or daughter. And it's almost like I want to live my own life. I want to be stubborn. I want to make my own decisions. And really each of those have different strategies that we can kind of approach how to work with those resistances. But always, doesn't matter what somebody puts up as a barrier, if you get them to identify the why, or if you get them to identify and think about what their life would be like if they are successful with this behavior change, focusing on that can overcome a lot of those barriers, whatever category they fall into.
Yeah. I find a lot of people that they feel like what they're doing is sufficient, even if what they're doing isn't very much. Like they have this perception that, well, I walk a little bit, or I do these chores, or I do whatever, and that's enough for me. I don't need to do all that exercise stuff.
Yeah.
And for them, kind of refocusing them on, well, and how's that gone for you over the past 5 years? Have you gotten better or worse? Well, I'm getting older, of course. You have to have this conversation of opening up to, well, you're fighting this declining process, and what you're doing really probably isn't sufficient to fight those things. And here's some things in the future you might want to be mindful of.
Yeah, just give them the functional training model, right? And say, okay, you've got this one little honeycomb covered. Look at all the rest of this stuff. You need to be doing all of it. And you're only doing this one little piece,
Yeah.
basically just encouraging them to diversify their training programs, because that's what they're going to need to really successfully age, right?
Yeah. All right.
I see a question about fitness tracking devices. We don't require them. It's obviously something that has been shown in some cases to really boost adherence. I love mine. I make sure that I try to get more steps each day than the day before. If I'm sitting on a conference like this all day, I'm going to make sure that I take the dog for a big walk later. So, but it's not always necessarily a super positive in adherence increasing device for everybody. So it's just kind of an individual sort of deal there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we are out of time. We have some other good questions and comments that have come in. And what I would just recommend, connect with Dr. Thompson directly on those things, and he'd be happy to give you some advice and get back with you. So really appreciate that. So here's his email right there, so you can get in touch with him. Appreciate you being available for that. So thank you, Dr. Thompson, for contributing to our summit and for addressing this very much needed topic. Really appreciate it, doing it very thoroughly. So thank you for that. Thank you for everybody for attending the summit, and I hope you have a good weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Cody.
You are so welcome.